Were dinosaurs offspring of Nephilim? Is that why they didn't survive the flood?
Seraphim angels are the most common watcher angel, and these are serpent-faced, six-winged dragon. They are the ones who were doing most of the violations against creation to create giants and other creations. So they would have created beings that would have raised up their image. So now you have reptilians, and you have a reptilian-faced fallen angel.
Got it.
And it starts to make some sense. And dinosaurs, before they were called dinosaurs, were called dragons.
Gary Wayne was recently on the Deep End podcast, and he was asked if the Nephilim was actually dinosaurs. I never ever thought about it like this, and his answer will shock you 100%. So let's get right into it. Shout out to the Deep End and Gary Wayne. I'm excited to watch him. Let's get into it.
Were dinosaurs offspring of the Nephilim? Is that why they didn't survive the flood? Or is that, in your estimation, atmospheric changes? Why do we not have dinosaurs anymore?
That's a crazy question.
Yeah, it's a very good question. So if dinosaurs were in the period before the flood, then they would have died in the flood. But yet, there's dinosaurs that were in the ocean. Just, of a little bit different sort of nature. But the dinosaurs that we would look at are kind of a reptilian sort of being. So we know that the fallen angels were implementing their technology, and we get even that understanding coming through from polytheist history today as the chimera understanding of DNA manipulation that was done a lot in their accounts of prehistory. And so dinosaurs could likely be in the MO of giants because they have to also apply their spirit somehow to them. Just as today we can create a clone, but we have no spirit to put in it. So you have a soul, a body.
This is so weird. So Nephilim gets translated into giants to the Greek, or gigantes, and then from that we get giants. Dinosaurs are giants. They're massive. Even when we think about tall, like human giants, dinosaurs would be on that level. What if God was destroying dinosaurs? That's crazy to think about.
No, animals have a different spirit than humans, and angels have a different spirit than humans as well. But they had the ability to do that DNA manipulation. So, and when they tended to create things, we have the giants, so you could create giant beings as well. We also have the elementals that they would have created as well, which have a variety of beings. There's 4 different groups of elementals. And we do get elementals in Galatians 4 as elementals. It goes back to the Greek word stoichion. And these are the ones that enslave us in the world. They're part of the hierarchy. And in Colossians 2, they're talked about as rudiments. And it goes back to stoichion too. They also enslave us and work in association in both accounts with the angels. So we know they have the ability to do creations. The question is were these dinosaurs then, or were they older? And so seraphim angels are the most common watcher angel recorded by the polytheists. And these are serpent-faced, 6-winged dragon angels. So when we look at Quetzalcoatl as a plumed serpent after the flood, or if we look at Osiris as a Uraeus angel, or Baal or El.
What he's saying is the seraphim were kind of reptile type angels. This is all so crazy. I've never heard this theory before.
From the biblical, Uraeus as being a flying serpent angel. Or we get the Nagas in subcontinent of India, or the dragon creator gods. This is constant again around the world for the pantheon. They are the ones who were doing most of the violations against creation to create giants and other creations. So they would have created beings that would have raised up their image, so to speak.
Wow.
And they like to have themselves honored. So now you have reptilians, and you have a reptilian-faced fallen angel.
Got it.
And it starts to make some sense. And Dinosaurs, before they were called dinosaurs, were called dragons from ancient times. So now you have another sort of correlation. Dinosaurs we are now being explained as having feathers. So now you have these feathered serpents, just as you have the analogy of the feathered or plume serpent within the Quiché Maya and the Aztecs. So the only question then
There's a lot of questions. Isn't the sons of God find women attractive? As in women. They're not producing some alien reptile, I don't think. Not alien reptile, but...
so we know they could have done it. And they probably did do it. It was probably a violation as part of the corruption. Now, was that before the flood? Or does it go back to the understanding of Ecclesiastes 1, where you have nothing is new under the sun? What was will be again. And as you move on into that passage in about verse 17, it says, and the understanding of this will only bring grief and sorrow. So it's talking about a cycling pattern of stuff that God is interceding to prolong, that's related to the book of life that we've already talked about. And that might suggest that there might be more something to 2 Peter 3, where he had this destruction by fire that is positioned to happen again in the end time. That happened somewhere in the beginning. In the beginning is a reference to Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, and the idea that we could have an older earth, because you could translate Genesis 1 in one of two ways. And it could be translated, and I won't do the whole litigation of this because it's like a 2-hour presentation. There's so much information on it, but just sort of give the glimpse of it is that you can have Genesis 1:2, where the Ruach of the Elohim, the Spirit of God, is hovering over the darkness, the chaos, as it's known in polytheism. Psalms 104, that also has the creation of the angels and talks about these pillars of the earth that the earth would have been destroyed by fire down to. When God sends his Holy Spirit, the earth is renewed. And you have the Ruach of the Elohim there in Genesis 1:2. Now you look at the standard understanding of the dogma, where it says the earth was void and formless. And those words should be understood in the Hebrew, and you may want to have a different take on the standard dogma. Doesn't mean we have to believe it, but the word was is the Hebrew word haya, which is the root word for Yahweh or Jehovah. And so it can mean was, am, is, or became. So what's the right translation for the context of the text? What's the right translation for all the other passages that might be related in the Bible? And then you have, void and formless, and you're into words that are tohu and buhu, which means to become a ruin, to become void, to become destroyed. It is something that is implying an action happened to cause that. And we can sort of double check that and verify that in Isaiah 45, where it says God doesn't create anything in vain. He creates everything to be lived in. Now that word vain is tuhu, ruin. He doesn't create anything in ruin, doesn't make it desolate in the beginning. He creates it whole. So in Genesis 1:1, we have in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth whole. But now we have this renewal process likely going on in Genesis 2. So if you have this war that's going on with the angelic rebellion, that might be a better place for it, with this planet destroying capability that they have that's coming about for the end time. And you would destroy the earth down to the foundations. And then when it's renewed, you're going to have the water separated from below to above to create the firmament in underneath. And that's called heaven. So it's perfect with Exodus 20, I think it's verse 18, where the earth was created in 7 days, because heaven can be translated as the location where God lives. It can be what's outside the firmament and what's inside the firmament. In Genesis 1, when the firmament is created, it's called heaven.
So he's thinking there's a war going on between the angels and demons, a heavenly war, and these angels species created or twisted some life. I don't know what he's getting at here. It's a little confusing in my opinion. Comment down below if you can help me out.
This possibility that the world was older, it was destroyed down by fire to the foundations and then renewed, which makes perfect sense of what's going on in 2 Peter. So as we sort of roll that into our understanding, you have a better location that might match up better for some of the dating of these fossils for the dinosaurs. And maybe that's a better fit for these much older dinosaurs. And I'm not saying there wouldn't be in that scenario dinosaurs before the flood as well. But the problem with that is what happens to the dinosaurs in the sea. Now, maybe they just died out, but we don't have scripture on that. So either way. So again, I kind of look at what better fits all the other passages that roll downstream.
Right.
Because
But I'm pretty sure, guys, that there still have been sightings of massive creatures like dinosaurs that live in the sea. Still, like, people spot some wild things. The ocean is so vastly underexplored. How can you? So that's a thought.
the Bible's MO is to add more information, but not to contradict.
Beautiful. Okay. When you say the second incursion, which was after the flood, is this an implication that Genesis 6 happened again, or is this more of a homage to the Gilgamesh and the Greek? Like there were giants that created boats and survived. Is that second incursion a repeat?
Well, my understanding and how I apply the term second incursion, again, it's not in the Bible, that term. So it's a name that's been applied to what would be understood and how I would understand it as other angels fallen would go after the flood in spite to recreate the giants.
They did it again.
Yeah. So what's interesting in the Bible is we look at Nephilim as the giants, and that's true. Nephilim goes back in Genesis 6:4, where it has the KJV where it says giant. That's the word Nephil. The male plural is Nephilim as the giant ones. So they can use it in singular or in plural. And it also means a bully, and it also means a tyrant, both description of giants, just as bulls were gods and their offspring were called gods throughout polytheism. These are the bulls of Bashan that are referenced throughout the Bible, and the ones mocking Jesus on the cross in Psalms 22. So we have a better understanding. And you also have tyrants going back to Tyrannos, which is the Gyges kings, giant kings out of polytheism, who were tyrants. These were Gyges.
That is crazy, though, to think about. Could the angels have created offspring again? But weren't they thrown into prison, so they wouldn't do something like this again? Comment down below. Straighten me out a little bit.
Is the Greek word for giant. So just to do a sort of a quick sort of compilation there. So this second incursion, as it relates to the Nephilim, is interesting because Nephilim doesn't show up after the flood biblically in terms of being actual beings.
What about Goliath?
Well, I'm going to get there.
All right.
It's a very good point. And so people will say, well, what about Numbers 13 before they'll get to Goliath? And it's kind of a critical path here. So
Right, and Joshua, talking about Nephilim in Jericho.
Look at Numbers 13:33 in the embellished or the evil report, as is talked about of the scouts that have gone into for Moses to explore the land of the covenant. They come back and say there were Anakim there, and the Anakim are the descendants of giants, and that word giant is the Hebrew word Nephilim. So what's going on here, if I'm saying there's a distinction here between giants before and after the flood? So understand that this is an embellishment. This is trying to drive fear into the Israelites by the other 10 scouts
Yeah.
versus Caleb and Joshua, who gave an accurate accounting before and said there were 3 Anakim kings and there were people taller and greater and stronger than Israel. 2 distinct groups, but still fearful nonetheless. So the Anakim, though, are not Nephilim, but they're still giants. And how you get there is Deuteronomy 2. Deuteronomy 2 has a whole list of giants after the flood, like the Ohorim, like the Emim, like the Zamzuzim, like the Avim, like the Kajulhim. These are giants, but that's not the Hebrew word for Nephilim. It's Rapha and Raphaim. And Raphaim are a tribe of giants as it's described as well. Now, there's a series of words with Rapha, 7495, meaning to heal, because the giants had this healing ability. 7496 is an evil spirit, which is the disembodied spirit of the giant and a derivative of 7495. And 7497 is the giant and tribe of giant. The 2 ones that follow after that are names of people named Rapha, but all derivative of 7495. Teraphim, which is a talking idol, is a derivative of 7495 as well in the Old Testament, and that's somehow this talking idol is different than the other idols. It's like the one that Rachel takes back with steals from her father Laban. That is this family idol. It says image there, but that word image goes back to teraphim. Now, teraphim is also used and translated exactly from the Hebrew that way, and why they don't do image there, I don't know why, as teraphim, but not all the translations are perfectly consistent in the same application for that talking idol that could also heal.
Wow.
And it roots back to Rapha. So these Raphaim giants are somehow distinct from the Nephilim that's recorded in Deuteronomy 2. Well,
He's saying that these are giants, but not necessarily the Nephilim. And obviously, I thought when you read about Joshua in Numbers, you think most likely they're using hyperbole and being like, there's giants there, because they didn't want to attack. But maybe they were part of the tribe that was massively tall.
Are giants in Deuteronomy 2, and also Rephaim. So where do these Rephaim giants come from? So they're either a different name for the giant, but why would they be named differently when they're called Nephilim in the beginning? Well, we get this interesting sort of concept that there are either different names for the same group of giants, or there's something different. And
Right.
so the giants that are recorded in the Ugaritic text, for example, which has a ruling council called the Baalim Council, with Baal being the son of El, Anat being his consort, Ashtaroth before the flood consort of El, and gods like Amaru and several other ones, and I won't go through all of the names. They created Rephaim after the flood as a second incursion. And the Ugaritic texts are written in Semitic, which is where Hebrew derives from. So the words are very close in a lot of cases. And so the RPM would have been original Hebrew. Same with the RPM in the original Ugaritic text. So we get a second incursion account by offspring gods who rule after the flood versus the parent gods who ruled before the flood. The parent gods who ruled before the flood go to the pit prison.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So there's offspring gods, and he's using that as in like lowercase gods, like spiritual beings, I believe. That's, people like part of the divine council, the sons of God, whatever that Genesis 6 likes to talk about. So in saying there's offspring gods that they created, this is all just blowing me away.
Offspring gods take over as the disloyal or rebellious host. Hebrew Saba for an army of angels rank in order so they would move up. So Baal moves up to replace El. Osiris moves up to replace Ra. Zeus moves up to replace Kronos. All of these create giants after the flood. So now you get a constant, and now we get some data points as to These are different somehow. And they also have a fertility issue, which the Nephilim didn't have. We also get through Numbers 13:33 that there's a veracity to the Nephilim before the flood because they're being used and embellished to the giants to scare the Israelites even more from the actual giants. So what we get from that is the Nephilim were more powerful and likely larger. So now we roll through to Goliath, who's the son of a giant. Just as there's 4 other giants from the same father, that's the Hebrew word Rapha. Now we get a tribe of giants that's in the War of Giants in Genesis 14, along with the Horim, along with the Amalekim, along with other giants, along with some hybrid giants like the Amorites, also listed in Numbers 13.
That's crazy.
The Amorites are part of 12 patriarchless tribes of the Canaanites in Genesis 10 and 1 Chronicles. And there are 70 patriarchs, only 9 don't have a patriarch. And so Canaan is a patriarch. Seth is his son, that's a Sidon is his son, that's a patriarch. Heth is a patriarch, so they produce Canaanites, they produce Sidonians, and they produce the Hittites. But now you get the Amorites, you get the Jebusites, you get all of these names, and you don't have a patriarch. These are eponymously named after a patriarchal Rephaim giant that intermarried with females. Now, how do we know this is possible? We get that in Genesis 36. In Genesis 36, you have this add-on to the Table of Nations. Why? Because Rephaim patriarchs aren't listed in the Table of Nations. So you don't see Rapha as a patriarch for the Rephaim, even though they show up in Genesis 14 and part of the land that Abraham is going to be receiving of the peoples that are occupied. They're called Rephaim as well in Genesis 15. So the Horim that we talked about in Deuteronomy 2 and in the War of Giants show up in Genesis 36. Timnah marries Eliphaz. Eliphaz is the son of Esau. Esau marries Aholibama. Aholibama is a Horim. Timnah is the daughter of Seir, of the dukes of Seir, of the Horim. So they're creating new dynasties with this intermarriage.
Wow. This is just crazy stuff. So I know this could be legitimate reasons for the Israelites to go and conquer certain types of other nations who rebelled against God. It could be. I'm not saying 100%. It's just a thought. This is all just fascinating and mind-blowing to me. Welcome to the mind-blowing channel. I would love to know what you guys think, but at the end of the day, still, we all need Jesus. We all need a Savior. That's why we're created, to have a relationship with the Father. If you've never decided to follow Jesus, I encourage you to do that today. It will be the best decision you could ever make. And I promise you guys, you will never be disappointed. So go to Jesus today. Know that he loves you. And in the description below, there will be a link for you to click to help you to decide to follow Jesus for the first time. I encourage you to do that today.